Welcome back to tonight's story. If you're watching alone, you might want to check your locks before we begin, because what you're about to hear isn't about monsters under the bed or creatures in the shadows. It's about something that feels far more real. Imagine moving into a new home, in a new town, knowing no one. And on Halloween night, you receive a warning. Don't open the door after 10. But what happens if someone calls your name? What happens when the knocks start and they don't stop? This is the knock after 10. Claire had always dreamed of independence. At 23, she finally left her bustling hometown behind for a quieter, slower life in the little town of Pine Hollow. With her first teaching job at the local elementary school and a rental cottage all to herself, everything seemed perfect. The house was charming in its own way. Creaky floorboards, ivy crawling up the sides, and a wraparound porch that looked like it belonged in an old novel. The townspeople were polite but distant. At the market, people smiled, but their eyes lingered on her a bit too long, as if they were waiting for her to ask questions she didn't yet know to ask. As October settled in, Claire decorated with pumpkins, orange lights, and paper bats. She wanted to make the holiday feel like home. What she didn't realize was that in Pine Hollow, Halloween carried a different kind of weight. On Halloween morning, she noticed an envelope wedged beneath her welcome mat. No return address. Just her name, scrawled in hurried handwriting, Claire. Inside was a single note. Do not open your door after 10 o'clock. Do not look through the windows. No matter what you hear, stay silent. Trust me. Claire laughed at first. Some small town prank, she thought. Maybe an initiation for newcomers. She set the note aside, trying not to think about it. But as the day wore on, the words tugged at her thoughts. That night, children swarmed the street. Claire handed out candy, smiling at every trick or treat. Her little house, glowing with lanterns, felt warm and alive. Parents waved from the sidewalk. Everything felt normal. By 9 o'clock, the last group of kids had passed. The streets grew quieter. The jack-o'-lanterns flickered like tired eyes. Claire made tea, put on a blanket, and queued up her favorite horror movies. Her phone buzzed. A text from her aunt in another state. Just checking in. Claire typed back. All good? Just a cozy night. She didn't mention the letter. Why worry anyone? But as the clock crept toward 10, her unease grew. She thought of the jagged handwriting, the urgency in those words. No matter what you hear, stay silent. At 10:07, it came. A knock, slow, measured. Her heart jumped. Maybe a late-night trick-or-treater? But when she checked the candy bowl, it was nearly empty. And no children were on the street anymore. She froze. Then a voice. Claire. Her stomach dropped. The voice was low, deliberate. She hadn't told anyone her name in town. Claire, open the door. Her throat went dry. She crept to the window, pulling the curtain a fraction of an inch. No one. Just her porch, bathed in cold light. The knocking grew sharper. The doorknob rattled. Claire, let me in. She backed away, clutching the blanket to her chest like it could shield her. The knocking didn't stop. Sometimes it was soft, a gentle tap, like fingers brushing against wood. Other times, it thundered, shaking the doorframe. But the worst part wasn't the knocking. It was the voices. Sometimes it was a child's giggle, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a chorus of murmurs that seemed to rise and fall, impossible to make out. She thought of the note again. Do not open your door. Do not look through the windows. But temptation clawed at her. What if she just peeked, just one glance? Her phone lit up, an unknown number. A text message, don't look. She dropped the phone in shock. Minutes crawled into hours. Claire sat huddled in the living room, lights off, holding her breath. At 11:45, the voices changed. They began calling her name again. But this time, it wasn't strangers. It was her mother's voice, then her father's, then her best friends. People who weren't even in the same state. Claire, it's cold out here. Let me in. Claire, sweetheart, why are you hiding? Claire, it's me. Open the door. Tears filled her eyes. She knew it couldn't be them. But the way they said her name, it was perfect. Exact him. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, same number. It's not them. Don't answer. At 12:03, it stopped. No knocks, no whispers, no rattling knob. The house felt impossibly still. Too still. She sat there for an hour, waiting, straining her ears. Nothing. When dawn came, she finally collapsed into uneasy sleep. That morning, police cars crowded the street. Her neighbors, a family of 4, had been found. Gone. No signs of a break-in. No sounds reported, just silence. Claire's hands shook as she thought of the night before. The warning, the voices, the text messages. Who had sent the letter? Who had texted her? And how had they known what was coming? And so Claire never learned who or what had been at her door that night. Some in Pine Hollow say it's an old legend that every Halloween after 10, something walks the streets calling names of those who will listen. But maybe it wasn't just a legend. Maybe next Halloween, you'll hear it too. A knock at your door, a voice whispering your name. And when it does, will you remember the warning? Or will curiosity make you answer? They say fear doesn't always come from the darkness outside. Sometimes it comes from the things we trust the most, the everyday, the ordinary, like water running from a faucet. Our next story is about a young boy who learned far too early that some places in the home aren't safe at all. This is the story of the thin man in the shower. I was 10 years old when my great-aunt Eleanor came to live with us. She had lost her husband a few months earlier, and the farmhouse where they'd lived together for decades had grown too big, too quiet, and far too lonely for her to stay. My parents offered her our spare room, and she accepted with a soft, tired smile. From the very beginning, I adored her. Aunt Eleanor smelled faintly of lavender and always carried a small purse that jingled with butterscotch candies. She'd slip them into my hand when my mom wasn't looking, winking as though it were a game only the two of us shared. But what I loved most wasn't the sweets. It was her stories. She had a story for everything. About growing up during the Cold War. About sneaking into old cinemas with her friends. The projector light flickering across their faces. About the summer she ran away to the seaside just to prove to her parents that she could. But the best stories, the ones I waited for, wide-eyed under my blanket, were the scary ones. Aunt Eleanor never told them in daylight. No, those were reserved for the hush of night, when the house was quiet, and the only sound was the rain against the window, or the creak of the old beams above. She'd lean close, her eyes glimmering with something both playful and serious, and lower her voice to a whisper. She told me that when she was younger, she dabbled in things she shouldn't have. Seances, fortune-telling, rituals done in front of mirrors at midnight. She didn't say much about what she found, but every so often her eyes would drift off, as though she were remembering something she couldn't quite put into words. Most of her tales faded quickly from my memory as childhood does. But one about a figure she called the Thin Man, never left me. It's still with me, years later, clinging like steam that refuses to clear. It was a rainy evening when she first mentioned him. I had asked her why she always filled the bathtub to bathe, never once stepping under the shower like the rest of us. She looked at me for a long time before she answered. "Showers aren't safe," she said softly. "Not for people who notice things." I frowned. Notice what? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she leaned closer. "The water blinds you, running over your eyes, over your face. You close them too long, and that's when he moves." "Who?" I whispered. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the darkened window. "The Thin Man. He waits where the water falls. He isn't there right away. Only if you close your eyes too long. 5 seconds is safe. 10 seconds. Risky. 15. She stopped. Her mouth tightened and her voice dropped to a rasp. 15, and you'll feel him. My stomach knotted. Feel what? Her eyes flickered to mine, and for a moment they seemed almost wet, reflecting the lamplight. Fingers. Long, wet fingers. Against the glass. Against your skin. I shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around me. "Why doesn't he come when you take baths?" Her expression softened, but the sadness in it was unmistakable. "Because he only walks where the water falls. Still water keeps him out." That night, I barely slept. And when I did, I dreamed of pale fingers slipping under the bathroom door, reaching for me as I hid under my blanket. From then on, I couldn't shower without thinking of her words. Every time the shampoo slid down my face and I squeezed my eyes shut, I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. 5 was safe. 10 was dangerous. By the time I hit 15, I was clawing at my own face, gasping, forcing my eyes open with soap still stinging them, convinced that when I blinked again, I'd see something behind the spray. My mom noticed. She scolded Aunt Eleanor, accusing her of filling my head with ghost stories. Aunt Eleanor didn't argue. She simply looked out the window, as though her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of running water. It was early, the kind of hour when the world is still heavy with sleep. The bathroom light glowed faintly beneath the door, and the hiss of the shower carried down the hallway. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold against the floorboards. "Aunt Eleanor?" I called softly. No answer, only the water. I crept closer and knocked. The sound echoed strangely against the silence of the hall. Still no reply. The water ran on, steady and relentless. I knocked again, harder this time. Behind me, I heard my parents stir. Their bedroom door creaked. But before they could step out, I reached for the knob. It wasn't locked. When I pushed it open, steam rolled out into the hall. The warmth hit my face, mingling with the sharp scent of soap. My heart thudded in my chest as I peered through the fog. And there she was. Aunt Eleanor lay crumpled on the bathroom floor, half under the spray of the shower. Her eyes were wide, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. One hand clutched her chest. The other was pressed against the fogged glass door. Streaks marked the condensation where her fingers had dragged down. They told me later it was her heart, that it had been quick, painless. But I knew better. Because when I returned to that bathroom days later, the streaks were still there. And some of them weren't on the inside of the glass. I'm grown now. I have my own house, my own children. They laugh when I insist on baths, never showers. My wife thinks it's some lingering trauma. My kids think it's superstition. But I remember the hiss of water, the fogged glass, the handprints where no hands should have reached. And I know, if I ever dare to close my eyes in the shower for 15 seconds, I'll feel him, the thin man, waiting. And now, for our final story tonight. If the last tale left you uneasy, this one will leave you haunted. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and on Halloween night, it always comes knocking. This is The Children at Maggie's Door. I was 10 years old when my great-aunt Eleanor moved into our house. She'd lost her husband a few months earlier, and the big, empty farmhouse had become too much for her. My parents offered her our spare room, and she accepted. I adored Aunt Eleanor from the start. She smelled like lavender and always carried butterscotch candies in her purse. She'd slip them to me when Mom wasn't looking. But the thing I loved most was her stories. Aunt Eleanor had a story for everything. Growing up during the Cold War, sneaking into old cinemas with her friends, even running away to the seaside for a summer. But my favorites were the scary ones. The ones she only told after the lights went out. She said she used to dabble in things you shouldn't dabble in when she was younger. Fortune-telling, seances, mirror rituals. When she told me these things, her dark eyes would gleam like she was remembering a secret she wished she hadn't learned. Most of her stories faded quickly from my memory. But one she told me about the shower, still clings to me like damp steam. It was a rainy night when she first whispered about the thin man. I'd asked why she always filled the bathtub instead of stepping into the shower like the rest of us. Aunt Eleanor looked at me for a long moment, then leaned closer, her voice low. "Showers aren't safe for people who notice things," she said. "The water running down blinds you. You close your eyes, and that's when he moves." "Who?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "The thin man. He waits behind the spray. He's not really there unless you shut your eyes too long. 5 seconds is fine, 10 seconds is risky. 15. She paused. 15 seconds and you'll feel him. Feel what? Fingers. Long, wet fingers on the glass. Her words made me shudder under my blanket. "Why doesn't he come when you take baths?" Aunt Eleanor smiled sadly. "He only walks where water falls. He can't stand still water." That night I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of pale fingers slipping under the bathroom door, searching for me. After that, showers became impossible. Every time shampoo dripped over my face and I had to squeeze my eyes shut, her voice echoed in my head. 5 seconds is fine, 10 is risky. By the time I reached 15, I'd be gasping, blinking, half-rinsed, heart pounding. Mom noticed my behavior and scolded Aunt Eleanor for filling my head with nonsense. But Aunt Eleanor just looked out the window and said nothing. A week later, before dawn, I woke to the sound of running water. The bathroom light glowed under the door. My stomach turned cold. I padded to the hall and knocked softly. "Aunt Eleanor?" No answer. Just the hiss of the shower. I knocked harder. My parents' door creaked open down the hall. But before they came out, I twisted the knob. It wasn't locked. Steam billowed into the hall. Through the fog, I saw Aunt Eleanor on the bathroom floor, the shower still running over her. Her eyes were wide, mouth open as if screaming underwater. One hand clutched her chest. The other was pressed to the glass door, streaking trails through the condensation. They told me it was a heart attack. Quick, painless. But I knew better. Because later, when I went back into that bathroom alone, I saw the streaks again. And some of them weren't on the inside of the glass. I'm grown now. I have my own family. They think it's odd that I insist on baths instead of showers. But they humor me. My wife thinks it's trauma. My kids think it's superstition. But I still remember the hiss of water, the fogged glass, and the marks left where no one could reach. And I'll never risk closing my eyes for 15 seconds. And always, there was someone missing. Maggie. She had once been their ringleader, the boldest of the group, always dragging them into adventures. But on Halloween nights, she was never there. They could never remember why. They could never place the exact moment when the four of them had last been together. Maggie, however, remembered she had grown to dread Halloween. Not because of the costumed children who filled the sidewalks. She adored them, in fact. The little pumpkins and scarecrows made her smile. The older kids, with their clever makeup and masks, reminded her of when she and her friends once ran laughing from house to house. But the dread came later in the night, when the knocks began. It had started in 1978. On an ordinary Halloween evening, Maggie and her friends, Alistair, Janet, and Owen, were walking home, their bags of candy swinging at their sides, laughter carried into the cool air. The kind of joy only childhood can hold. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A driver, careless and unseen, cut through the night. He didn't notice them until it was too late. The impact tore the world apart. The details blurred in Maggie's memory, as though her mind itself had locked them away to protect her. But she remembered the silence after, the weight of grief pressing in from every side. She was the only one left. The days that followed were a blur of sorrow, a loneliness so deep it hollowed her out. She thought grief was heavy at first, but over time, she discovered it wasn't weight. It was emptiness, a void that consumed more and more of her each passing year. And then the visits began. Every Halloween, without fail, there came a knock at her door. Always 3 knocks. Always the same voices chattering excitedly outside. She told herself it was her imagination, some trick of the mind born from trauma. But when she opened the door, there they were, unchanged, smiling, dressed in their old costumes, as though time itself had frozen. At first, she couldn't face them. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, tried to pretend she wasn't home. But no matter what she did, she heard the knocks. Year after year, the sound became a part of the season, like the rustle of dry leaves or the chill of autumn wind. This year, she could no longer ignore it. The children moved along the street as they always did, their voices light, playful, tinged with confusion. Janet pouted, tugging at her older brother's sleeve. "Alistair, we haven't gotten anything yet. Everyone else's buckets are full." "Be patient," Alistair muttered, though his eyes betrayed the same unease he tried to hide. Owen lagged behind, fidgeting with the edge of his Cyberman helmet. Something about the street always gave him an odd sense of déjà vu, a chilling familiarity he couldn't shake. Finally, they reached the last house, Maggie's house. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made even the smallest sounds sharp. The creak of the gate, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Alistair raised his hand and knocked 3 times. Inside, Maggie froze. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the bowl of sweets. She knew who it was. She always knew. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. And there they were. 3 children, dressed just as they had been so many years ago. A devil with crooked horns, a little witch with a crooked hat, and Owen, of course, with his cardboard Cyberman helmet, patched with tape. Maggie's heart twisted at the sight. "Trick or treat," the children chorused. Her throat tightened. "Wow," she managed, forcing a smile. "Great costumes, kids. Very, very creepy." The children beamed, thrilled that at last Someone had seen them. "We made them ourselves," Janet said proudly, bouncing on her heels. Maggie's eyes glistened. "Yes, I know. I was there when you Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard. "Here you go. Take these. You can have them all. It's getting late." She handed the basket to Alistair, who took it with a grin. "Thanks, Mrs. That's great." "You're welcome," Maggie whispered, blinking back tears. "See you next year, Alistair." She shut the door quickly, pressing her back against it as silent tears streaked her face. Outside, the children exchanged puzzled glances. "How did she know your name, Allie?" Janet asked, frowning. "She probably heard someone say it before," Alistair said dismissively, giving her a playful shove. "Oh yeah, I guess," Janet muttered, though the doubt lingered in her eyes. Owen tugged at his helmet, looking back toward the closed door. "Maybe we'll see Maggie on the way home," he said hopefully. "I wonder where she went this year." But as they turned and walked into the night, the question lingered in the cool October air. Where was Maggie? Why was she never with them anymore? And Maggie, alone inside her house, clutched the empty candy bowl to her chest. Because she knew. She had always known. That night, in 1978, had taken more than just her friends. It had trapped them in a cycle they could never escape. And every Halloween, the knock would come again. Forever. And that brings us to the end of tonight's tales. 3 stories, each different but all carrying that same haunting reminder that the past has a way of lingering, that shadows can walk beside us unseen, and that sometimes the things we remember us back. From the chilling silence of the house where the light never fades, to the restless echoes of children forever trick-or-treating. These stories remind us that not every knock at the door should be answered, and not every memory lets go when we wish it to. Which story kept you up the most tonight? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that blur the line between the living and the forgotten. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights steady, and maybe, just maybe, listen twice before you open the door.